my name is Janette H, and it's really an honor to share this space and time with you all. And I just have to thank and give a shout out to my colleagues, Dr. Jess Chen-Feng, for envisioning and organizing this rich gathering of Asian American pastors, ministry leaders, and mental health practitioners. This is amazing, and it's fun, and it's delicious. It's all those things. And to Dr. Daniel Lee and the AAC for helping to make this is the inaugural event of the Asian American Wellbeing Collaboratory, and it's going great. So let's just praise God for that. And to Julian Garcia and all the AAC volunteers who are feeding us and the production team, we see you and we feel you. And as Jess said, there's so much abundance in this room. And Eugene also said there's so much capacity for healing in this room. And so I just welcome and acknowledge that. So I want to tie my reflections on pastoral well-being with my understanding of vocation, because for me, they intersect. I found that nothing can fully prepare one for the demands of being a pastor. And also, no one can aptly convey the joys of this calling to be a pastor. And yet, I knew since I was 13 years old that I wanted to become one. Now, it took time to gain vocational clarity. My desire to become a pastor eventually, so it started at 13, but it converged in college with an intersecting desire to pursue scholarship in academia as a biblical scholar. I didn't just fall into pastoral ministry, that is. It wasn't something that just came on my lap. Do you want to be a pastor? I see you as a future pastor. It was the opposite. I had to be resourceful even at a young age to learn more about what does it mean to be a pastor? What does a pastor do? How does one become it? And I had to be really careful and strategic about who I shared this desire with, because it was really it was like a fuse. People would always react, usually uncertain of what to make of it. Sometimes definitely against it. Others just really like incredulous and curious as to why I felt this so strongly. They didn't really know what to do with me, in other words. And I share this because I think this need I felt to be intentional about discerning my pastoral calling and formation led me early on to be intentional about getting the right kind of guidance and support, and also the right kind of training, because I was I was desperate for peers, mentors, and resources. They didn't just come to me. I had to seek them out, find them, and eventually, they became more abundant, but it wasn't like that initially. And while external resistance to my pastoral calling was confusing and painful at times, I'll admit, it did push me to do the inner work that was talked about earlier. Like I had no choice because I was called into question. So I had to question my motives, like, why do I want to do this? And who am I to do this? Do I have the giftings? Do I have the character? Do I have the resilience? The what, the why, the how urged me or compelled me to attend to my whole person and be very conscious of this process of becoming, not just doing. And I think it's a gift. When I reflected on it in preparation for today, at the time, the external resistance felt like unfair. It felt, like, give me a chance. Let's just talk about it. I'm not even saying it's going to happen. But I think what I'm grateful for is that it required that I pay attention to not only my desire, but also the process of formation and becoming. I also realized that I needed training, theological and spiritual formation, and this eventually led me to attend seminary that fully affirmed women in ministry, just as Fuller Seminary does, and Madeline is over the table, she's coming back. But if there's any inkling in you, please talk to her, and if there are people you know who might have the giftings and the capacities for pastoral ministry, what a difference it would have made if someone actually called me out on that earlier, right? Tell them, ask them to check it out, to talk to people that are in this room. And at seminary, I met other women, some of them in this room today, who also felt and pursued a call to ministry. And that really spurred me on and gave me a different imagination for what the work we do. And at seminary, I was blessed with the gift of lifelong friendships with fellow pastors and practitioners. And it's also in seminary that I experienced the gift of free therapy. It was really good. And because I was a woman involved in ministry and also a young mom of 3 in the thick of doctoral studies, It became a matter of life and death for me to establish rhythms for work and rest for my well-being. I just knew I wouldn't last. I couldn't go forward if I didn't do this now. And so things like, for the last 11 years, I've met with the same soul care group of pastors and a therapist, actually. She's not doing therapy with us. She's one of our fellow ministers that we get together, but we meet every month for soul care to pray. And I can count on my hands the times I've missed over 11 years. And also monthly spiritual direction for as long as I can remember, for a good amount of time, maybe 8 years. I've been pretty active about seeking out mentors and peers. And if there's something I can say I'm good at, I'm really good at knowing my need. And I'm really good at finding good people to help me with that. I don't mean use them. I mean like finding wise and good experts, people who know more than me, which are a lot, to seek their wisdom, to get their guidance, to not wait to learn passively, but to be more active. And peers with whom I can share in collective care and delight. With identity, people with like peer mentorship, conversation, commiseration, reflection. Those are the lifelines for me that have been what seems at times of plenty or when things are stable or peaceful, relatively like maintenance. But I've learned that in times of adversity and drought, they are a matter of life and death. And it's kind of hard to establish the aqueducts and the structures of that rhythm in crisis. Now you can, and it's a good time, better to start then than never, but to do it when things are relatively stable and peaceful, where it becomes like a second nature, habitual. That's the thing that I think was really imperative and foundational for like the long game of ministry. So when we think about well-being, or when I think about well-being, I often associate it with joy and satisfaction experience in the present, right? How are you right now? That's well-being a lot of times. Are you satisfied? Are you fulfilled? Are you happy? But when I was reflecting for this day, well-being has a lot to do for me with living hope and delayed gratification. That trust that the joy will come in the morning. Because of vocation, because I was pushed early on to be questioned as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, I experienced that vocation is really rocky. It's really windy. The work of vocation is inherently tension-filled. There's truth that the idea that we are more likely to love what we do when we do what we love. Yes, that's great. That sounds great. It's great. But we may need to love those we're not inclined to love, and to do things we don't desire to do. I've experienced vocation as a conflictual thing, a conflict with God's purpose for me and God's calling for me and the ways I'd rather live, the things I'd rather do. Epidemiologists, right? Tim Lomas and Tyler J. Vandervelde, they used this metaphor of the garden to help conceptualize well-being, and I found it really helpful. It helps me think about pastoral and personal well-being like a tree. So if you can imagine a tree and its numerous parts that all need to be healthy to reach its full potential. So like the roots, that would be physical health, physical well-being, and the foundation. It's like the foundation from which a tree draws its strength and anchors its existence. But then there's the trunk and the branches that would represent mental well-being, if you will. It give the tree its overall form and its shape. And there's the flowers or the fruit, depending on the plant. I'm not a plant person. But it symbolizes, maybe you could say, the social well-being, as it's through the flowers and the fruits that cross-pollination take place, correct? That trees interact and other flora and living things are in relationship. And then there are the leaves. They signify the spiritual well-being as they draw energy and nourishment from a source outside of the tree, from the sun. You can spiritualize that all you want. And trees, plants, they have seasons for flowering and for pruning. And I think about my well-being and I associate it a lot with pruning, which paradoxically does short-term damage for the sake of long-term health. And so what I mean by this is that a lot of times I found that conviction and desire, they needed time to develop roots of character. They needed to develop the trunk of competence and wisdom. And it's in the pruning and that seemingly the fallow seasons where I realized that a lot of becoming was taking place. Now, I'm not a glutton for punishment, but I have experienced and lived through and pastored through conflict and challenge, pain, and adversity. And it brought me to a really humbling and liberating place of dependence. I know my need. I know my need for others. I know my need for God. I'm still learning that. And this kind of sense of these adversities, or these, you could say, drought seasons even, they've taught me that flourishing isn't the result simply of what I'm doing, but what God is doing. And it led to this kind of resilient wisdom that you cannot purchase, you cannot really learn in class. You can't just get from hearing people. You have to live into it and through it. And again, not to elevate suffering, but you need to get through the other side of conflict or adversity to experience joy and satisfaction in the things that we do. So the context and the miracle, I was thinking about the multiplication of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, is community, where my weakness is your strength and your strength is my weakness. My abundance can overflow into your lack and vice versa. And so we belong to this garden of well-being and depend on one another to thrive. So I was thinking about seasons then of well-being. Just as there's a flowering and the fruit-bearing time, there's also the pruning time, but there are also seasons. And I've experienced seasons of growth, of pruning, barrenness, foulness, and fruitfulness. And they're all aspects of thriving. Psalm 1:3, we're like trees planted by streams of water, yielding fruit in the right season, our leaf not withering. And so I think we tend to equate well-being with maximum growth. I do. I love productivity. I love to get things done, right? I'm like, who in this room is the one going to help me get things done, right? I like that person by nature, right? And I want to help others get things done. But I needed a reframing of well-being. It's not just maximum growth, because unrestrained growth and even over-fertilized growth aren't necessarily healthy. Right? We just assume, you imagine the tree with these giant Costco-sized fruits, the branch is so heavy and ripe with these unnaturally ginormous fruits. And we think, that's what I want to be. That's the kind of ministry I want to lead. That's the kind of life I want to have. But growth needs balance and harmony. And when we think of thriving, right, I think there's a balance that I'm learning to strike between being under and overdeveloped and needing to have a sense of personal satisfaction and presence and waiting, delayed gratification for what God is going to do in bigger abundance if I could wait and stay faithful. And so going to this metaphor, when I was thinking about well-being as having to do with belonging to a garden with other flora, diverse flora, that means that unrestrained, undisciplined growth can also cause damage to others around us. And I think that's something this gathering helps remind us, that while our contexts should not diminish or squelch our growth and becoming, that they are essential to our growth and becoming, that our well-being is bound up in the well-being of others in our churches and communities. Thanks.